So now at this stage, we're going to transport you on a virtual journey to Russia, where our panelists will be discussing developments in Russia and how the key changes are affecting their business. They're not actually all based in Russia. I think they're all over the place, and I'll get them to tell you a little bit more about themselves in a moment. The panel is led by Stockton Birthisel, and I'm going to hand over to him now. Thank you very much, Stockton, and I'll get you to introduce everyone and to introduce your panel. Thank you very much. Oh, you need to unmute.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you now. You're on mute.
Yeah, so thanks very much, everyone, for joining today, and thank you especially to our three esteemed experts. So we have Derek Bloom, an aviation lawyer based in Washington, D.C., who's very conversant with the aspects relevant to the Russian aviation market. And then we have also two hands-on people from operators who deal with the day-to-day of operating in Russia. And those are Eric Weisskopf from Hyperion and Razvan Stefan from Emperor. So I think instead of maybe introducing each of you or giving you the opportunity at this particular moment, perhaps when I first address the question to you, you can just give a minute or two about yourself. So you know, as we're aware, or most of us are aware, there have been some significant developments in Russian aviation with a view to ultimately liberalization of the Russian aviation market. And this is a very important topic because, as any market participant knows, the Russians for many years were driving certainly the top end of the market in relation to heavy jets. Although we saw a bit of, you know, push or fallback, I should say, in recent years due to various economic and geopolitical developments. And then, of course, latterly, we've had the disruption of coronavirus. This is absolutely, you know, a key topic which all market participants should be aware of and should closely monitor. So I'd kind of like to go from the general to the specific. And so starting first with our lawyer, resident lawyer, I'd like to just ask him. So there are two main developments that have occurred in Russia, and obviously, you know, you can explain it to us better. The first is a restriction on the domestic commercial flights occurring within Russian airspace. And the second, which is perhaps more generally friendly, is the removal of the import VAT aspects, you know, arising in connection with the importation of a civil aircraft into to Russian airspace as of 1st of January 2020. So I'd like to ask Derek first to comment on where we think we're up to, and especially, you know, what's the current position as of this year, and particularly in view of coronavirus.
Oh, good morning. Where I am. Can you hear me well, Stockton?
Yes, yes.
Ah, good. Well, I'm very pleased to speak with you all. And Razvan and Eric are heavily involved in the market, so I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to interact with you on this question. Yes, you've previewed it well. Russia this year has had an exemption from import VAT, which had been heavily lobbied for years, and I was leading that effort. Because previously, this was to incentivize the import of aircraft, obviously, into Russia to then be used on commercial flights. And this was a response to the prior situation where 95% of the charter flights inside Russia were done on European and other foreign registered aircraft registered outside of Russia that were flown into Russia, not customs cleared, and yet were dominating the charter market, which was making it impossible for legal operators to compete with the cost structure of these gray import aircraft that were hadn't paid the import VAT, hadn't paid customs duties where that used to be due. and we're able to offer much lower rates and be much more competitive than somebody who's operating legally. That's always been a conundrum in Russia. If you operated legally, you were bearing higher costs than the gray market. So in many areas in the Russian economy, the legal operators, the Western companies going to Russia to conduct business, doing business by the book, have had a higher cost structure and been unable to compete successfully with people skirting the rules. So eventually Russia addressed this in the aviation context and said, no more operation inside Russia of aircraft registered outside of Russia that have not been customs cleared. And they stopped that pretty well the year before last in 18. And then during 19, there was a real shortage of charter aircraft. And so when you went to aviation events in Moscow in 19, you were hearing about how there was a real deficit in available aircraft, and the prices had gone up, and there just weren't aircraft available to fly. And so the market incentive is, the blind hand of Adam Smith is working. And this year, some more aircraft have been imported, but only very few. And this is what I've been trying to research, that I can document right now. Only 3 aircraft were imported during 2020 to be used on charter flights inside Russia. Now, it might be that number 3 is actually 5, because I've just become aware recently of a operation out of Omsk, which Welltall, which is has brought in. They're operating 5 aircraft and appear to have brought in another 2 or 3 this year. I'm still trying to clarify that with them directly, but they're showing 5 Russian registered aircraft on their website, but the Rosaviatia records refer to only 3. So it could be that 4 aircraft were imported, but the reason I'm trying to get particular about which operators brought in which aircraft is just to be able to say, authoritatively that, gee, only 4 apparently, or only 3 or only 4 aircraft were brought into Russia to take advantage of this exemption from import VAT during 2020. It's a very small number. And consequently, the aircraft that are in the country is many more than 4. There are, and I can distribute some information to anyone who would like to have it. There seem to be 31 different commercial operators in Russia operating Western business jets. And so and I haven't totaled up the total number. I won't try to do it off the top of my head here, but only 3 or 4 more were added. But because there's still a relatively small number of business aircraft operating on legal charter flights in Russia, they're all being heavily used. And so what I'm hearing from a number of the operators is that they've got a lot of business, and they're flying at full capacity on domestic charter flights inside Russia. And the pilots are flying the maximum number of hours they're allowed to fly, and their aircraft are fully utilized, and that the price of charter flights has gone up. That would just be supply and demand, of course. So what I see here is a pretty good business case for the import of more aircraft to be put into charter operation in Russia. This would become an exit for some good quality used aircraft coming out of the United States and Europe. And for example, the Hawker model is very popular in Russia, and a number of the Challengers. But the Hawkers have a very high demand over in Russia. So I'm waiting for some of the large operators to look at this situation and say, now's finally the time. I mean, to base 3, 4 aircraft of their own inside Russia and operate them domestically. And that now would also be the time for some of these successful Russian operators to be able to demonstrate to Western banks or Russian banks, Western money being less expensive, that they have a good business case to purchase 3 or 4 more aircraft and put them in Russia. And then you'll get into a whole number of consequent legal issues and legal work, and business, transactions. You would get into the financing of additional aircraft and the proper, operation of them. So there's this trend, so this year, I think the incentives to bring in more aircraft, the financial incentives, the removal of the VAT problem, has not been the magic wand that we expected. A lot of people expected a larger volume of aircraft to go into Russia. But I think because of the coronavirus situation and the economic slowdown in Russia, a variety of factors outside of aviation, that aviation also, along with many other businesses, has really had a setback. Razvan might be able to speak to, this from the inside more than I'm looking at it from the outside. But we just see the results. There are only very few aircraft have gone in this year. Those that are there are very busy. So it seems like we have a demand for more aircraft pretty clearly, so will the big operators, take that up and put more aircraft in there next year. And I believe that several of them are studying that seriously. And people are being, keep the information close to their chest about what their exact plans are. Were it to come, then, we have experience registering aircraft, helping people to select a Russian AOC to work with. Now, all the Russian commercial operators are going to be in a good position to catch some growing business, either of their own, or of Western operators bringing some aircraft into the country, because the aircraft will need to be placed on a Russian AOC and customs cleared. You get into some issues that about weight limits for the exemption from the import duty. The import VAT, we have an exemption, but if you're over 20,000 kilograms, we have a question. And largely, you should also be able to get an exemption. So these are the questions I think that are going to be on the agenda next year. So as of now, what we can say is the great majority, the 90-something% of all Russian purchases of aircraft will result in those aircraft being registered still not in Russia, but in Europe and in the United States, more frequently in Europe. And so that's San Marino, that's Malta, and Razvan's running a Malta AOC, and there's a couple other large operations out of Malta. And Razvan will probably speak up and say that, yes, he continues to see that most Russians want to put their aircraft somewhere in Europe. Now, there are a lot of operational issues, maybe Razvan can speak to it, about why it's easier to fly a Malta-registered, San Marino-registered aircraft to the destinations where Russians want to go, and then those aircraft can fly in and out of Russia to pick up their passengers, but not to fly on commercial flights inside of Russia. You can do a lot of private flying inside of Russia as a foreign registered aircraft, but not commercial. And there's a lot of nuances there, but I won't digress into them too far. The other thing I'm prepared to talk about, if people want to come back to it, is since the reality is that the great majority of Russian-built aircraft are registered outside of Russia, and they may only fly into Russia and within Russia on private flights legally, although there's a number of skirts around it, but legally. There's a whole process to go through to answer the question, well, how am I going to operate my non-Russian registered aircraft, within Russia on a private flight? What are the things I have to do? And I can go into that a little bit if we circle back to it, but there's a whole lot of interesting filings.
I think some of the points that you're mentioning are ones that we're going to return to. So,
right.
So if I can just move on a little bit. So then I wanted to ask Eric, so in relation to the restrictions that we're now seeing in relation to domestic revenue flights, how does this actually impact, your typical, client, namely, an ultra high net worth individual who's flying internationally?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here, and thanks to have such a competent board here together. I think Derek was mentioning already almost everything in his perfect summary, and I'm referring actually back to Adrian Jones's talk before. It highly depends on where the client, the passenger, the owner ultimately has its kind of residence / tax home, and that is driving then on how he is traveling, because he has to somehow take a compromise nowadays, whether it's within travel in Russia, within Russia, or then on the other side within Europe. There are kind of tricks and trades, and maybe Derek is coming to them on how you can combine them, halfway. But it's affecting the client insofar that he has to make a decision. And I think you see that with Russian clients very clearly, that some of the flight departments in Russia, or let's say the oligarchs around those corporations, they have maybe a corporate flight department in Russia having, Russian registered aircraft imported, and they can fly, whether it's the 11-hour flight to all to the east, or whether it's serving the 2-hour, little flight to the belt around Moscow eastbound. There he is then using the Russian registered aircraft absolutely legally. And whenever he goes on to, let's say he's in the oil and gas business, he goes to Angola or he goes to Nigeria or whatever country, he then typically takes a different registered aircraft, in our case, the Maltese or Luxembourg registered aircraft, because he's still facing too many restrictions with his Russian registered aircraft. If he's abroad, outside Russia on a permanent basis. So basically the question is, or the main impact now is that they have to make a decision. In worst case, they need 2 aircraft, worst case. If they want to take it top-notch serious, and one circulates within Russia with maybe the one or the other flight just out and in of Russia, and then another aircraft which is literally circulating in Europe or in the rest of the world, because you don't want to have an AOG at this stage with a Russian registered aircraft, let's say in Nigeria. You simply have no maintenance company, or you have difficulties in bringing, a repair team which is approved in Russian brackets to then work on the aircraft and release the aircraft.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. All right. So so one of the things that's resulted from these developments is the view that, for example, Western operators ought to be either setting up their own Russian AOC or partnering with someone. And so I'd like to ask Razvan, please, if I may, what would you see as the advantage for a group of having a Russian AOC?
Good afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be here, first of all. Basically, I started business aviation 9 years ago, and Eric was my first boss in business aviation. So it's always a pleasure to attend such panels, especially having great speakers here. Yeah, what can I say? As Derek mentioned already, it's clear that 2 years ago, the customs or the authorities in Russia started to enforce the legislation, which basically was always there. It's nothing new. It was just silently accepted. But those times are definitely over. So it's clear now that to fly commercial, to fly foreign registered aircraft inside Russia, or even Eurasian Customs Union for commercial reasons, it's definitely not possible anymore. This is without discussion, and this is what we face at current stage. Now, what was the purpose of this? It's clearly financial driven, first of all. Second of all, we have to understand, us as Europeans, we have to understand their perspective also, as we have the right to protect or we ask the authorities to protect the European market by not allowing Russian registered aircraft to fly commercially within Europe. They also have the right to protect their operators and demand the same thing from the foreign registered aircraft. I mean, we do the same. Why should they not do? If you look at what Adrian said earlier, even USA is applying VAT import now for all the aircraft. Doesn't matter you operate it commercial or private. Yeah, we are talking about this Trump tax 15%. So it's there. It's clear. It was just a matter of time to get here. Now, is an AOC solution in Russia viable? Now, if you ask me, it's definitely viable for a group of companies. Yeah, let's say Aim of Emperor Group or whatever it's called has an AOC in Europe, in Malta, with our customers having their their aircraft registered in Malta. Of course, it would make sense that the same group of companies or partners to open an AOC in Russia, and then, as Eric correctly said, you combine the flights, let's say fly from Europe to Moscow with the EASA registered aircraft, doesn't matter the jurisdiction, and within Russia with an aircraft registered on a Russian AOC, which can do commercial or even private flights without any headaches. Because to be very honest, now it's even a challenge to perform a private flight within Russia. You can stay with the aircraft there only 30 days, even if you operate it only private, and then you have to get out. So definitely an AOC totally makes sense, but things will not move so fast as we anticipated, or as some of us anticipated. I mean, Derek, to answer one of your doubts, why not so many, one of your questions, why not so many aircraft were imported, registered in Russia? It took us 2 years it took our group, not us, 2 years to open the AOC in Russia. And it took another 7 months, of course, for the new aircraft type to get the type certificate for it. So it's not only constraints, you know, they still need time to learn the openness of European market. Things take time there. Things will take time there for the next 2, 3, 4 years. So we have to be patient with the transition phase and with them changing their mindset. That's one of the reasons, also combined with the pandemics, which definitely delayed or didn't touch your expectations. I personally had no big expectations, but things are moving. Things are moving into the right direction, and we have to admit that it's still a very important market for all of us, whether we like it or not. Does this have a future? Combination of AOCs? Definitely. Even if we are looking at the post-pandemic development of the situation, there will be people, there will be entities, there will be companies who will prefer to transport their employees, even in Russia, with business aviation aircraft, with a business jet, instead of buying a ticket business class, first class to an airline, which will be very expensive and doesn't offer the mobility which business aviation offers.
Okay, excellent.
The moment and in the region.
Eric, can I just, sorry, Eric, can I just speak to you, to turn to you just to comment on what Razvan said, and then I'll come back to you, Derek, after Eric, and then I want to make sure that we're leaving enough time to talk about the financing aspect of this, which I think everybody has got a lot of interest in. So Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, really just a few seconds. I mean, of course, the interest is initially there and immediately there to jump into that market. I mean, which entrepreneur would not have this reflex? Absolutely, but it's the same question then as why are we not going to the US? Why are we not going to Saudi Arabia? Why are we not going to the Chinese local market, you know, which are all probably the 4 or 5 huge markets with a lot of internal traffic. And it's simply that the entry barriers at the end of the day are too high. Is it shareholder restrictions? Is it a local partner? Is it the time consumed, etc.? I think Razvan's shareholder, which I know well, they're in a kind of a lucky situation that they kind of are able to demonstrate, you know, the 51% rule in an elegant way in both directions. But we all know then it's difficult if you don't have the right partner to do that in Russia. So while theoretically it's a great idea to immediately jump onto the market and, you know, probably offer a great service, the big aircraft management firms, they will probably all hold back a little bit because then the entry barriers are too large, and it's probably then more ending up in a partnership like we're doing now with an existing Russian operator.
Okay.
Strongly agree. Strongly agree. There are challenges.
So, Derek, do you want to comment on what Eric and Razvan said?
Unmute.
Well, the absence of the Western operators shows that yes, they're being stopped so far by these types of considerations. But I think that the numbers didn't work. I mean, and I had a senior executive with one of the major Western operators told me prior to 2018. I mean, I've been working in business aviation in Russia for 15 years and went over there in '95 and lived and worked there for 20 years. I still go there. But the attitude before Russia reformed its laws in 2018 was, we the Western operators, if we're allowed to come in here and obtain a flight permit and a customs clearance to do domestic commercial flights, that we will do that because that's economically more efficient than paying the import VAT to operate legally. They began to play the game the way the local operators were. But the math has shifted now. Now the huge barrier to entry, which was the import VAT, that was the big showstopper. That's gone. Now, I've had occasion this year twice to study registering aircraft in Russia and deregistering aircraft in Russia. And there still are problems there. I mean, I know we'll segue into financing, but strictly from the logistical standpoint, and Razvan's colleagues in Moscow are quite clear, that they've registered aircraft in Russia and regarded it as a fairly straightforward process to register an aircraft there. Now, I had occasion to try to buy an aircraft out of Russia this year for a client was trying to buy an aircraft out of Russia. We were studying, how to purchase a Russian registered aircraft, conduct a closing, and we got into a large digression, which actually ended up stopping the deal, which we wanted the Russian registered aircraft to be deregistered in Russia and put in a Western jurisdiction before closing. And that's a several month-long process. I mean, as was said, the Rosaviatia is not currently geared up to be responsive like the Western registries. So the transactions are much slower. And a lot of arcane paperwork has to be submitted, typical Russian bureaucracy, but then they're just very slow they're not competing for the business, like Western operators try to be responsive. So there's still a lot of practical, I'm agreeing with Razvan, the practical issues about, registering aircraft there, the type certificates, but then just dealing with Rosaviatia on an aircraft that's already known in Russia, and then how to undo that. But shifting to the financing side, just quickly, Stockton, since you said you wanted to get there. I mean, in conversation with some of the major European banks, I have one in mind. I've been working with one of the large Swiss banks this year on them arranging financing for the purchase of two very large, 7500s. And they say that they're very willing to see the aircraft be registered in Russia for the right owner with the right operator. They want an operator that will also help to repossess the aircraft if there were ever a problem. The tripartite agreement, and that's sort of new ground in Russia too. I mean, which operator in Russia are you going to trust if you're the bank to go repossess your aircraft for you? I mean, which operator is going to sacrifice their relations in Russia for the sake of their relationship with you, the Western bank? Those types of questions make people afraid. But then the reality in these financing transactions is, and it's kind of, it's always almost humorous, is that we go to a lot of difficulty to negotiate the loan agreement, the security agreements, and then here comes this magic piece of paper, which is the guarantee from the oligarch, the guarantee from the billionaire, that if there ever is a threatened event of default under the loan agreement or security agreement, that you, the guarantor, are going to fix it. And we're not going to have to enforce our rights under the loan agreement or security agreement. We're never going to repossess this airplane. We're going to come to you, and we're going to take it out of your money that's in Switzerland, and then, so we that of course happens here all the time too, is that we write legal agreements and we have aircraft purchased by companies that offer limited liability, but then the banks say, we need a guarantee enforceable against the beneficial owner, regardless of any legal limitation in a contract or in a legal entity. We're going to go to the guarantor. Now that's in the case of the question of putting aircraft in Russia. I think that same mechanism works. I mean, this is why the bank is willing to say, if we have the right guarantee from the right owner, we'll let the aircraft be registered in Russia. is if there ever were a problem, we're going to go to under the guarantee agreement to get our money back. You know, we're not really going to try to enforce any of the processes that we're going to study about how do we deregister it, how do we, what notice do we have to give, how do we resell that aircraft. We're not really going to go there. We're going to go to the guarantee agreement and call somebody up in Switzerland and say, pay off the loan. You know? So it's kind of interesting how aircraft finance works, because we get into a lot of technicalities, but really the guarantee is the key piece of paper, you know, when you're dealing with a high-end aircraft and a high net worth individual. That's the bankable piece of paper.
Absolutely. So, Russell, I understand you have some very recent experience talking to various banks as to their position on this. So, can you elucidate the waters with your experience?
Yes, definitely. Basically, we had two projects in which certain individuals were interested to have an aircraft registered in Russia and also needed a financial solution. To my surprise, I have to be honest, I discussed this with three banks, with Credit Suisse, with UBS, and with even with UniCredit from Austria, and I personally expected at the beginning a clear no, and this happened 1 year ago, something like this, maybe, if I remember correctly, even in January this year. So the reality was that their answer was exactly more or less Derek's statement. Yes, we are ready to look into it. Should there be a business case which is guaranteed in the proper way, we are happy to go further and discuss numbers. Of course, the main concern of the bank is very clear. It's very easy. It's the right of repossession in case of default, because they are obviously afraid. Okay, I'm going to how will I get my asset out of Russia in case something happens? This is their main issue at current stage, besides the other issues which are standard and are there, like sanction list and who is in fact the ultimate beneficiary, and does he offer trust that we can go in with such a deal, which is a risk, we have to admit, for a financial institution. Yeah. Besides this, I also had very good feedback from other financial institutions, not banks, but financial institutions who are, I think, more open to it, of course, applying different numbers than a bank.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Eric, can you just give us your take on that? And one of the things I'd just like to toss in, which is kind of a subset of all this question, which is something very near and dear to my heart as a guy offshore who's, you know, promoting various offshore aircraft registries, is the impact of all of this on the registration of the aircraft. Because initially when we first started hearing about this, we thought, oh my gosh, you know, all the Isle of Man aircraft are gonna, you know, migrate to Russia or whatever. But I don't think that that's happening, and may indeed, you know, not happen because of the financing issues that we mentioned. So, Eric, what do you think?
I think almost everything has been said here. I mean, when it comes to financing, we talked about the preference of the register, and I do see private banks with large, you know, security deposits or other guarantees being willing to finance the Russian registry. That's fine. Or venture capitalists, which are, you know, talking on different equity returns. As we see in the airline industry, there is very little activity of financing the Romeo Alpha registry, respectively 83 BIS agreements. Derek, you might be better off here than I am, but 83 BIS agreements, they do remain predominant in the airline sector, and I'm just waiting until I would see the first business jets doing this. I'm not aware of any of those constructions, but it could be done, and we have studied it in earlier times already, but I have not recently seen anything, but I'm not in the middle of the market anymore. Now,
Can I offer a thought, Eric, on that, which is Yeah, the 83 biz mechanism is there, but what's the problem is that the exemption from the import VAT is for aircraft that are registered in Russia. And so if you have a Bermuda registered aircraft, it apparently is not going to be qualifying for the exemption from the import VAT.
Yeah, no, very easy to answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
When it comes to where are all those offshore registry going, to be honest, a very good question. I mean, we'll see in the next 2 years. I do not see the Russian internal market, what I call the cabotage market, growing way bigger than it was before, especially in the long range sector. I do see the market, of course, growing slightly. I do see a certain cabotage market among the 2-hour range, with narrow body aircraft that is overdue that this will happen. Would, however, a wealthy individual, and sorry to jump back, these are more for charter operators offering charter services. But would a wealthy individual really change his registry? Probably no. I see more that either state companies like oil and gas or in the metallurgical sector are having a fleet of Russian registered aircraft, which they probably had before, offshore. And I do see charter operators like Sirius with its Hawkers, etc., and you, Razvan, focusing on the 2-3 hour, charter market and hitting that. But I do not see ultra high net worth individuals, unless they're under tremendous pressure, to register their sole aircraft they have in Russia. I do not see an endless market for that.
Okay.
Derek,
Very
again,
good.
you have
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of other reasons beside the numbers, beside the VAT. I mean, people have concern about having valuable assets in Russia. Russia famously has a large export of its ownership of its assets to European companies for various reasons, and so you wouldn't want to put a valuable asset over there, is what a lot of people are saying. So yeah, I think it's the commercial operators that are the ones who necessarily bring aircraft in and register and operate them inside Russia, but not the high net worth individual. I agree with you. Yeah.
So I think we're coming up to the end of our time, but we have a very interesting question from Olivier Durand, which one or both or more of you can field. So can you please comment and share views on the Russian government decision to require video surveillance for commercial and business operation from, to, and over Russia? Is anybody familiar with that area?
I haven't yet worked with that from the legal side. No.
No, haven't come across. Okay.
To be personal, to be honest, I heard some things, but I would not be able to answer such a question at current stage, because I don't think it's achievable. I mean, how do we translate video surveillance all over Russia? Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine. Yes, it's very hard for me to imagine that this can be achieved from even a technical perspective very fast. Yeah. In Russia.
So Lorna, do we have time for sort of closing remarks from each of the?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got another 5 minutes or so before we go into the break. So yeah, by all means, please do.
So who would like to jump off the diving board first? Razvan, would you like to give just a few concluding remarks, summing up?
Yes, definitely, very shortly. I am confident in the future of business aviation, no matter the form, no matter the jurisdiction. The times we are living now, which none of us thought we will ever live, will get better, and I think we just need a bit of patience. Things will move more fast in the positive direction, more fast than we expect. And we just need patience. And at the end of the day, we also need to trust authorities that they are doing a good job in stopping this. This is the best we can do. And I would like to send a message of optimism and of trust in the industry in which we work. Definitely.
Thank you. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm let's say happy, and I think it's fair that Russia, steps up to normal market conditions. And is it protectionism? Is it just the same interest as the US or Saudi Arabia or China, has in its own territory? I think it's fair and it needs to be accepted. What I'm still missing, and there I'm looking as well towards Razvan in terms of we need time and patience is an equivalent to an FAA Part 129 or a European Part TCO approval, which literally allows operator to fly commercially within Russia, because it's still, it's doable, but it's still not extremely clear, and we had a lot of questions when we tried to apply it, etc. So having a bit more clarity on a proper third country approval would definitely help and bring the whole thing onto a new level. Then secondly, from a market perspective, I totally believe in the Russian domestic cabotage market. And it's a question of demand and supply, as Derek was saying. Now there is a certain boom, and at one stage we'll have enough aircraft locally to cover that need, and then that's it. And then I think we will have more or less stable market conditions. There will be a bit of overswinging, probably like we have seen it in China. Everything was booming in China a couple of years ago when domestic markets started to become attractive and accessible, and nowadays it's kind of swinging in at the certain level, and there is no more real excitement. People are doing it, it's there. But we're talking about some kind of realistic numbers, and the processes are there. So I see similarities with China a couple of years ago.
A good point. Derek, a few final words.
Yeah, final word is the business case for putting more aircraft into Russia, onto Russian AOCs for charter use inside Russia it seems to be clear. And I'm hoping now that people will finally pull the trigger on some projects that they've been talking about for a decade. And put a couple aircraft there. And there's a number of good operators, to partner with, either on a contractual basis or through a joint venture. There's a number of ways to approach it that would give people comfort. So I'm hopeful that next year we'll see some of this activity.
Excellent. Thank you. Lorna, over to you.
Excellent. Okay, well, look, thank you, Stockton, and your panelists, Derek, Razvan, and Eric. That was very illuminating, and I think we got some clear messages from your discussion. So we're going to let you guys go back into the audience. We hope you'll join us for the rest of the conference and continue to contribute. So we're actually now going to take a break. It's a 30-minute break, and we'll be back at 1400 hours Central European time. So you just need to check and make sure you know when that is in your local time. So it's roughly 30 minutes from now. And when we come back, we have a session which is looking at how can we future-proof aviation, which is a panel that's going to be hosted by Varun Joshi of Air Finance. So stay tuned. You've got time to go and turn the kettle on, or make yourself a coffee, or maybe something stronger, depending where you are in the world. And we'll join you again in half an hour or so. Thanks very much, everybody. See you again soon.